You know, for 3 decades, I've watched the African National Congress. And to me, they weren't just a political party, they were the architects of a brand new South Africa. The ANC, born from a struggle that lasted a century, carried the hopes of an entire nation on its shoulders. I think back to Nelson Mandela, that landmark 1994 election, the dream of a rainbow nation. Those were the moments that didn't just define South Africa. They felt like they reset the world's faith in what was possible. But now, for the first time in 30 years, well, over 30 years now, it feels like the party of Mandela is losing its grip. The promise of 1994 has slammed headfirst into the reality of 2024. It's clear the days of landslide victories are over. The political certainties I grew up with, they've vanished. This is the story of that monumental shift of how a revered liberation movement is becoming an ordinary political party, facing a crisis of trust that's shaken its very identity. For me personally, the real turning point was May 29, 2024. I remember watching South Africans line up for their 7th democratic election, but you could feel something was different. This wasn't another vote. It felt like a reckoning. When the results finally came in, the shock was seismic. The ANC took just 40.18% of the national vote. For the first time since apartheid ended, the ANC's parliamentary majority was gone, a dominance it held since 1994 without question. The scale of the fall was just staggering. Honestly, the party had hemorrhaged support, dropping a whopping 17 percentage points from the 57.5% it won back in 2019. This wasn't a slow leak, it was a political earthquake. And just like that, the result plunged South Africa into a new, uncertain era. Suddenly, the ANC, a party that for so many was the state, had to start negotiating for its own survival. To govern, it had to find partners, a scenario that was once completely unthinkable. This wasn't just a loss at the polls, it really was the end of an era. So, how did it all go so wrong? The way I see it personally, the answer is a bittersweet cocktail of broken promises, a deep-seated corruption, and crippling internal wars. The warning signs had been flashing for years, but the 2024 election was the moment the bill finally came due. First, we have to talk about the ghost of corruption. For so many South Africans, the ANC had simply become a symbol of graft. The state capture scandal under former President Jacob Zuma, which saw a systematic looting of public funds, left a deep permanent scar. And despite promises to clean house, a steady stream of senior ANC figures remained tangled in scandal, which just shredded the party's credibility. Then there's the massive gap between promise and reality. Just before the election, a stunning 71% of South Africans pointed to unemployment as the most critical issue. The official unemployment rate had climbed to a crippling 32.9% around that time. For young people, the picture was even more devastating. This economic pain was only made worse by a crisis in basic services. Those scheduled power cuts, what everyone knows as load shedding, crippled the economy and daily life for years. And even now, with the national grid more stable, President Ramaphosa admits that many local towns still face outages and that the country's crumbling water infrastructure needs huge investment. When you add in failing local governments and high rates of violent crimes, it's easy to understand why the frustration just boiled over. And finally, something I've been tracking for years, the ANC's own infighting, factionalism, has been tearing the party apart from the inside. This all came to a head with the dramatic return of Jacob Zuma, not as an ANC loyalist, but as the face of a brand new rival party, Umkhonto weSizwe, or what's commonly referred to as MK. The ANC's votes didn't just vanish into thin air. They were devoured by an opposition that had been re-energized and completely reconfigured. The 2024 election didn't just waken the ANC, it redrew the entire political map of South Africa. The main opposition, which is the Democratic Republic or DA, held its ground, finishing second with 21.81% of the vote. But the real story was the explosive arrival of the MK party. In its first ever election, the party fronted by the ANC's own former president Jacob Zuma captured a shocking 14.58% of the national vote, making it the third largest party literally overnight. The MK party's success was a direct hit on the ANC's heartland. In Zuma's home province of KwaZulu-Natal, the effect was catastrophic for the ANC. MK completely dominated with about 45% of the vote, while the ANC collapsed to just 17 to 18%. To me, this didn't feel like a political campaign. It felt like an act of political revenge. MK skillfully tapped into populist anger, capitalizing on the deep dissatisfaction with the current ANC leadership to carve out a huge chunk of its traditional support base. Meanwhile, the Marxist-inspired economic freedom fighters, or the EFF, held on to their spot as the fourth largest party with 9.52%. The result? A parliament with four major players, and not one of them with the power to rule alone. You had a wounded ANC, the DA as an established opposition, the EFF as a lingering radical force, and the MK party as the total wild card. With no majority, the ANC was forced to make a choice it had never had faced before. Who do you partner with to stay in power? Now, after 2 weeks of tense back and forth negotiations, the answer surprised just about everyone. I'm including myself in this. The formation of a government of national unity, or the GNU. Now, this isn't a simple coalition. It's a grand, complicated power sharing deal. At its core, you have the ANC and its long-time ideological rival, the center-right pro-market Democratic Alliance. They were joined by the Inkatha Freedom Party, or the IFP, and several smaller parties. The decision to leave out the more radical EFF and Zuma's MK party was, if you ask me, a pragmatic choice that definitely calmed the financial market. But this unity is very fragile. 18 months in, the GNU is still a tense alliance of parties with fundamentally different ideas on everything from economic policy to land reform. And while it has held together, you can see the deep crack. Major disagreements have popped up over the national budget and foreign policy, like when the DA criticized joint military drills with Russia and China in January of 2026. This whole thing is an unprecedented experiment in South African politics, an alliance born of necessity that gets tested every single day. Now, beyond the polls and the political deal-making, this moment really represents a profound identity crisis for the ANC. For most of its 114 years history, the ANC wasn't just a party. It was a liberation movement. Its authority was a moral one, built on the sacrifices of the struggle against apartheid. For decades, millions voted for the ANC not just on policy, but for what it stood for, freedom itself. But a liberation movement and a governing party are two different beasts. A movement fights an external enemy. A government is judged on whether it can keep the lights on, create jobs, and keep its citizens safe. The ANC has really struggled with this transition, often pointing to its glorious past while failing to manage the messy present. And that historical legitimacy is fading. There's a whole new generation of born free voters, people with no living memory of apartheid, and I'm one of them, who are judging the party on its performance, not its history. And with the persistent failures, the corruption scandals, and the soaring unemployment, the ANC's moral high ground has eroded. It can't run on legacy alone anymore. This election marked the moment the ANC became an ordinary, deeply flawed political party, now forced to compete and compromise just like any other. So, what does this all mean? It tells us that the African National Congress is no longer the sole driver of South Africa's destiny. The party of Mandela has been humbled, forced into a marriage of convenience with its biggest critics, and its hold on power is more fragile than ever. As we started in early 2026, the GNU is trying to navigate a sea of economic and social challenges, and all eyes are on the next big test, the 2026 local government elections. President Ramaphosa himself has urged the party to fix its terrible record at the local level to avoid another electoral disaster. But at the same time, an internal battle is brewing over who will succeed him as the ANC president in 2027, with names like Deputy President Paul Mashatile, Secretary General Fikile Mbalula, and even some outside business leaders being thrown into what's become a wide open race. Now, the question I keep coming back to is, can the ANC reinvent itself as an accountable, modern governing governing party before it's too late? Or will it just continue to fade, a shadow of the liberation giant it once was? South Africa's future now hangs in this delicate, uncertain balance. And that's my take on it. But what do you think the future holds for South Africa and the ANC itself? Can this government of national unity actually survive its internal divisions and deliver results? I'd love to hear what you guys think about it. So do make sure that you drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want more analysis on the world's shifting political landscapes, make sure that you do subscribe and go check out our podcast on Spotify, as this episode has just been uploaded there too.